Welcome to this session, which we'll call New HIPAA Rules, a briefing on March 26, 2013, HIPAA Rule Changes. My name is James Barclay. I'm a healthcare lawyer practicing in Tallahassee with a special emphasis on HIPAA privacy and security. Before we get started, I want to commend you for your interest in learning about these new HIPAA rule changes. Let's take a look at the agenda for today's session. First, I want to talk a little bit about the context of it and its goal. Second, I want to talk with you about some important dates. And then we'll get right into the changes made in these rules to HIPAA enforcement, privacy, breach notification, and security rules. Toward the end, I'll have just a brief word about GINA in HIPAA, and I'll explain that to you then. And we'll wind up with some suggested compliance steps and a recommended implementation schedule. Now, I'm showing you on the screen a picture taken of my desktop, my actual physical desktop, and on it you'll see a multi-page volume called January 25, 2013 HIPAA Rules. The federal government amended 41 rules, and I've incorporated those changes in 28 pages of your materials toward the end of them. The materials on my desk encompass more than 500 pages of explanation, and the purpose of that explanation is to let you know that you can't expect to understand all of the changes in the rules by just listening to and attending this session. If you're going to really use this information, you're going to have to dig down and read and understand these rules yourselves, and I've got a suggestion for doing so at the end of the program. Let's take a look at the context and the goal of today's session. First of all, you can expect to make changes to your notices of privacy practices. Next, there'll be changes in business associate agreements and additional HIPAA policies, procedures, and forms are going to be required. Probably one of the most significant changes is the fact that HIPAA security rules apply to business associates and their subcontractors. I'm going to discuss this at some length later in the program, but for now, understand that the goal for today's session is to comply now to best position yourself for compliance in the future. So let's talk a little bit about where these rules are coming from. And we have to go back to 1996 to some federal laws called HIPAA, adopted to help people keep their health insurance when they changed jobs. Buried in the HIPAA law was a section called Administrative Simplification. It's in Title II, Subtitle F of the 1996 HIPAA law, and out of Title II, Subtitle F, came the HIPAA privacy and security rules that are being changed in today's discussion. Following the HIPAA law, in 2009, there was a stimulus bill, and tucked way back in the back of the stimulus bill in Title 13 of Division A and Title 4 of Division B were features called high-tech HIPAA, and that significantly changed the enforcement strategy of HIPAA by increasing and tiering, meaning different levels, civil and criminal penalties for HIPAA violations. High-tech HIPAA got the attention of the healthcare industry because of those changes. Out of these two sets of laws, then, came the HIPAA privacy, security, breach notification, and enforcement rules. In addition to those rules, the federal government has issued from time to time guidances to help the healthcare industry comply with HIPAA requirements. And the most recent iteration of rulemaking occurred in January of this year, when on the 25th it issued the HIPAA rule changes that we're going to be talking about in today's session. You need to keep in mind some important dates. I've already mentioned to you that the rules were published January 25, 2013. They'll become effective March 26, 2013, but healthcare providers and covered entities and business associates don't have to comply until September 23, 2013. Keep in mind that if there are existing contracts, they can be used until March 26 of 2014, and that may be of some relief to you. Among the changes made in these rules were to the HIPAA enforcement rules. And the first thing I want to talk with you about are the tiered and increased penalties. What that means is there are different levels of violations, and at each higher level the penalty amounts are increased. And I'll show you in just a moment exactly what those are. The second enforcement item that you should keep in mind, that HHS will investigate complaints of willful neglect. Now that's a change, because before these rules, HHS may have investigated complaints. So now it's changing the rules of the game. So if you're involved in a willful neglect case, you're gonna get investigated. And you can expect that if there's any indication of willful neglect, that you'll be subject to a compliance review by OCR. Now keep in mind that even though we get investigated and may be under a compliance review, that HHS has and retained its discretion to resolve investigations and compliance reviews by informal means. And if that happens, you can expect some kind of settlement agreement or other requirements that will govern your behavior for a period of time. Keep in mind that HHS may now seek cooperation of covered entities consistent with new HIPAA rules, meaning they will try to cajole covered entities into compliance, and if that doesn't work, they'll begin their formal investigations. And then finally on this slide is the idea that HHS may share protected health information for enforcement purposes, not only with state attorneys general, but also the Federal Trade Commission. I want to talk now about tiered civil money penalties. And the lowest category are those areas of culpability where a covered entity who is reasonably diligent and didn't know that a violation was occurring faces exposure to civil penalties for an amount between $1 and $500 with an annual maximum of $1,500,000. Now that $1,500,000 figure isn't going to change annually for any of the levels, but I wanted to emphasize them in each slide so it got your attention. The next level is there is reasonable cause but not willful neglect, and you see the fines per violation are starting to increase now. While it was $100 to $500 for reasonably diligent, it's now $1,000 to $50,000 where there's reasonable cause but no willful neglect. And again, the annual maximum is $1,500,000. The third level it involves willful neglect that's corrected in time. And if you're involved in a willful neglect situation, you want to correct it as quickly as possible so you can take advantage of the lesser fines here of $10,000 to $50,000 with an annual maximum of $1,500,000. And then finally, in talking about tiered civil money penalties, is the highest level of culpability uncorrected willful neglect. And this is, of course, the highest and worst situation to be in because there's no minimum violation fine. It is $50,000 with an annual maximum of $1,500,000. There's a